Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, 2025 Compliant Trends in International Trade and Transport. My name is Kim, and I'm going to be your moderator for today's sessions. Compliance has becoming more and more important as the world of trade and transports keep evolving. Whether it's adapting to geopolitical changes, navigating new regulations, or keep up with the new technologies, it is important for all of us to be on top of it. So here's what we have planned for today. Jasper Eggebeen from HIDC will talk to you about the compliance challenges for logistics service providers. Herman Annick from RSM will give you some insight into geopolitical developments that's shaping the market. And Geert Rensen from Be Informed will talk about the technology role in driving compliance forward. After their presentations, there will be a panel discussions where we'll be exploring these topics further and, of course, also answering your questions. So please feel free to submit your question into the chat box as we go along. Thank you again for joining us today. Let's get started with the short introductions of all of our speakers. I'm pleased to introduce you to our first speaker, Jasper Eggebeen. Over to you, Jasper.
Thank you, Kim, and thanks for the opportunity to present today. My name is Jasper Eggebeen. I'm a Senior Manager Supply Chain Solutions at the Holland International Distribution Council. And within HIDC, I'm responsible for business development in Asia Pacific. The Holland International Distribution Council is a private non-profit organization, and we represent the Dutch logistics industry. And our main mission is very simple. We are here to promote the Netherlands as the gateway to Europe, and our objective is to attract as many logistics flows to the Netherlands and to connect them to our members. As I mentioned, we have 300 members, which we can categorize into 4 different categories. The first one are the logistics service provider, which is almost half of our member base. And these are the large global names, as well as the smallest logistics companies and everything in between. And they are active in each industry vertical. The second category are the companies that facilitate the logistics industry. So these are the banks, the law firms, consultants, fiscal advisors, customs brokers. RSM is one of our members who is holding this webinar today. And the third category is the logistical infrastructure. So these are the seaports, the airports, and the inland terminals. Most well known, of course, are Port of Rotterdam, Port of Amsterdam, and Amsterdam Airport Schiphol. And the last category is government related. So we are connected to all the local regional development agencies. So these are the provinces in the Netherlands, basically. And our strategic partner, the Netherlands Foreign Investment Agency, which can be found in all the consulates around the world and act as a first point of contact for foreign businesses wishing to extend their business into Europe using the Netherlands as a strategic base. Our services are quite simple. We provide supply chain advice. We provide a matchmaking service to our members. We conduct fact-finding trips. And best of all, our services for foreign shippers are completely free of charge. We provide neutral advice. Our services are non-obligatory, and we can provide a confidential service. So that's in a nutshell who I am and who we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Jasper. My name is Herman Annick. I'm director at RSM. RSM is the 6th largest accountancy, tax, and consultancy firm in the world. We are located in over 120 countries, and I myself am working in the consultancy practice, particularly on international trade, and we support our clients worldwide with respect to international trade consisting of supply chain management, trade compliance, such as export controls and sanctions, financial economic crime prevention, ESG, and technology laws. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Geert Rensen. I'm one of the founders of Be Informed. Be Informed is a software company and we established Be Informed to help organizations across the globe understand what regulations apply to them and how to comply with these regulations. Established in 2006 after research by the University of Amsterdam and the Tax Administration in the Netherlands, we currently operate in 30 plus countries and typically help public sector agencies, organization trade and transport, and in financial services understand what rules apply to them. As one of the founders, I couldn't do any of the programming, so I got stuck with marketing, sales, and my current role is helping customers implement the technology in their operations. Thank you.
So today I will continue by explaining the compliance challenges for the logistics service providers. To start off, I would like to say that compliance is a very important topic for logistics service providers in the Netherlands, and I see there's a high willingness to be compliant. But I also see that it's not very easy for the companies to remain compliant. And that's because they have to deal with quite a complex compliancy landscape. These companies are operating internationally, so that's the first level of complexity for them, because they have regional compliancy matters to comply to, but also internationally they have rules and regulations to comply to. But they also have the complexity across multiple domains. There's environmental compliance, data protection and cybersecurity, customs and trade compliance, labor law and worker safety compliance, and product compliance. And in cases where it's clear that you're compliant, that's okay. But in many cases for logistics service providers, it might not seem relevant to them. But when shippers or other stakeholders in the supply chain are non-compliant, the logistics service provider will be held accountable. And in some cases that's not very clear, which increases the liability for them. So navigating the challenges of compliance requires continuous investment in knowledge, keeping yourself up to date, training, but also investments in technology. And if you're a smaller logistics service provider, you need partners to help you remain compliant. So in conclusion, compliance is a complex field for them, in which they always try to keep up to date. And to give you a picture of the scope of the compliance challenges, I've listed some of the changes that in rules and regulations that we've seen over the past few years, and some which we expect in the future. And this list is not meant to be complete. I probably missed a lot of them, but these were the ones that we at HIDC have been tracking, and they have asked a lot of effort from our logistics service providers to implement them. Think about the Product Safety Act in 2019. This was actually one of the regulations which didn't seem relevant for the logistics service providers, but if the shipper is not compliant, the logistics service provider will be held accountable. Also, the Brexit had quite some impact on all the customs and VAT reforms. In 2022, we had the cybersecurity regulations NIS2 come into effect. In 2023, CBAM and PGS 37 for the storage of lithium batteries, and the new customs software this year, import control system. So there's been quite a lot of regulations which has been keeping our members and the logistics service providers busy. And looking ahead to the future, a big one that we don't hear many companies talking about is e-invoicing. Euro 7 standard for trucks is coming up, but The really big one are the VAT and customs reforms, which will take place from 2028 to 2038. So the conclusion is, compliance has a big impact on logistics service providers. But the other conclusion is we're not done yet. It's ongoing, and we need to expect us to be and to remain busy on compliance. So to remain compliant will take a lot of effort. First of all, to remain up to date on that complex landscape is the first challenge. The second challenge is that the regulations which have already been implemented by the logistics service provider are evolving, and that will keep asking resources, while new complex regulations are being introduced as well, internationally and across multiple domains. It requires logistics service providers to keep adapting and to keep themselves up to date with the expertise required to remain compliant. It has a high cost. It means investments in your assets, investment in your digital landscape, and in your sustainable business practices, while you want to remain competitive as well. It requires you to invest in your data system. Think about the data protection standards, cybersecurity, which is quite hard for companies to implement because their IT departments are already stretched beyond their capacity. There's lots of administration that needs to be done by the logistics service providers to report their compliance to all the stakeholders. And all of this while there's a lack of staff. Not only a lack of staff that has the knowledge on compliance, but as I mentioned, it's also the other relevant staff within the organization which is impacted, mainly IT. And on top of that, if you miss something, there's the potential for fines and penalties for non-compliance. So my main conclusion here is that it takes a lot of effort and resources to remain compliant in the future, and that the regulators need to understand that it takes time and effort to implement these regulations. And if the industry cannot keep up, the sheer amount of regulations really defeats its own purpose. So there has to be a balance between what is achievable on the side of implementation and on the side of introducing these new rules and regulations. So that's it from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jasper. And I think in furtherance of, let's say, the aspects that you mentioned, the compliance challenges, I think it's also good to look at the geopolitical developments nowadays that are actually also underlying, let's say, the developments into regulations and let's say how things are developing in the world. Yeah, if we look at the developments that are currently very actual and that have a direct or indirect impact also on logistic service providers. Of course, the war in Ukraine that is continuing, but also, let's say, the position of the US into that and the possible retreat of Trump, let's say, from NATO or, let's say, from the war in Ukraine, less support. Specialists say this may be an invitation for China to further go to Taiwan and maybe also get a position in the South Chinese Sea. On the other hand, we also see, let's say, a technical war, as it is sometimes called, between the US and China. There is a run to the top with respect to being on top of technology developments. And both countries are trying to protect, let's say, the technical know-how and let's say the sensitive technologies as they see. Also aspects like the climate change or the climate crisis that it is often called, results in quite a lot of ESG regulations, particularly in the EU. Next to that, the tensions in the Middle East, Israel now having a cease of fire with respect to Lebanon, but actually in order to prepare themselves for a possible intervention with Iran. So that may lead to other instabilities into the regions and perhaps extension of war, according to some specialists. And in the meantime, also a humanitarian crisis is taking place in the center of Africa, within Sudan, where also, let's say, there is a civil war going on, leading to a lot of issues like hunger and people on refugeeing for the war aspects. And as we have seen that these developments have a direct impact, for example, on logistics routes, resulting in increase of logistic costs that have to be put to the prices, let's say, to the clients of logistics service providers, but indirectly the reaction of EU and US, but also of China to these geopolitical developments has an indirect impact, which I will show in the next slide. So this is just let's say, a grab of items from the reactions of the EU. And as I said, the EU has announced and already set in place quite a regulatory movement with respect to ESG laws. For example, to achieve a climate neutral EU by 2050, that's the goal. So the aim is to really have a shift in how companies and both public and private entities are dealing with ESG regulations. Next to that, we also see a reaction of the EU with respect to protection of technology. So cyber resilience, supply chain resilience, but also technology laws, both to protect those technologies, but also to protect human rights with the use of technology. And the EU has actually announced a security package, which has emphasized on foreign direct investments that needs to be scrutinized, and considerations are being made by authorities, but also export controls are increasing, as well as the use of technologies maybe to violate human rights, and export controls is used as an instrument. On the US side, we see kind of similar developments. Also supply chain resilience with respect to ICT security, cyber resilience, but also export controls again. Also, the US has rolled out specific export control requirements with respect to logistics service providers and financial service providers. I come to that in a minute. Not to forget the sanctions on Russia by both EU and US that have a fast impact also on customs regulations nowadays, and the way the logistics service providers are expected to take care of compliance measures. So all these aspects result in more strict regulations. And to give you an idea with respect to ESG, on the next slide, it actually pictures the complexity of ESG compliance that is coming at us. This is just an overview of all the regulatory initiatives that have been taken. And also the question is the private sector, but also the public sector, ready for the announced EU customs reform in 2028 that Jasper was already highlighting? And actually, investigations show that, it is expected that logistics industry, but also other industries are lacking readiness to meet these upcoming regulations. So this will be a very challenging part. Despite all of that, I will show in the next slide the, let's say, trade compliance responsibilities that both, let's say, US, but also EU, and particularly the Dutch, have put on logistic service providers. And if you look at the US, both from the angle of export controls, but also with respect to sanctions, strict expectations have been formulated in guidances with respect to the logistic service providers. You can see examples with respect to freight forwarder guidance by Bureau of Industry and Security regarding export controls. OFAC of the Department of Treasury has particular expectations for the sanctions compliance in the maritime sector. Several US agencies have issued together guidance, which is called Know Your Cargo, where logistic services providers are being made responsible for knowing their client, knowing the supply chain, but above all, know the cargo that they are, let's say, facilitating in their logistic services. And they are being made responsible for complying with these export controls and sanction regulations. On the right side, I also put some examples there, let's say, of recent court cases with respect to logistic service providers, where the court explicitly said that from logistic service providers is expected, because they are a professional party, that they should understand their cargo they are facilitating, but above all, how the regulations do apply, let's say, to these goods that they are transporting, but also, let's say, the logistics activities in general. So that means that the responsibilities as such are being emphasized by the authorities in very recent publications. And if you look a little bit more into detail, for example, with respect to sanctions, on the next slide, I provided an overview of what these guidances and expectations entail, for example, with respect to sanction compliance measures that logistic service providers are expected to take. I'm not going to dive into the details, but it is expected that you know what to do as essence. So a compliance policy based on your understanding of the obligations that you have to meet, but also, let's say, how are you going to deal with all these sanction compliance obligations internally, roles, tasks, responsibilities, and also the risk assessment that is expected from you based on, let's say, these legal requirements. So what can go wrong with respect to circumvention of sanctions when certain jurisdictions or certain counterparties are involved in the transactions? And let's say the screening operations in practice, in the daily operations, these are becoming more important. If you compare to the Russian sanction regulations, where due diligence requirements have been emphasized by the EU authorities, not only a name screening, but also doing analysis, due diligence on ownership and control structures of high-risk clients, but also, let's say, end users, and checking them with sanction regulations, screening lists is being expected. And once an alert is being generated, these should be further looked into. So quite detailed expectations with respect to logistic service providers, sanction compliance measures, and also for export controls. These expectations are there, as I show in the next sheet, where the emphasis is not only on possible involvement of sanctioned persons, but logistic service providers are expected to understand the regulatory requirements that apply to them, not only EU or NL, but also, let's say, US. And as you may know, also the Chinese authorities have announced that as of the 1st of December, the Chinese export controls will enter into force and will be enforced by the Chinese authorities. And these export control regimes is actually a copy of that of the US, which means that logistic service providers should really understand their chain and their client, what kind of goods are involved, who is involved in those transactions, and are these parties sanctioned or not, but also what's the end destination, and what's the end use of these products. And as I said in the bottom right, what are the risks that relate to these specific characteristics of transactions or your clients' activities? As logistics service providers, you are expected to identify those risks, assess them, and take proper measures in order to do that. And as Jasper was already explaining, like, how are logistics service providers dealing with these issues? What is expected from them? And there is a difference between, let's say, bigger companies and smaller companies in being able to organize themselves. As I will explain in the next slide, actually the compliance program requirements that regulators and supervisors have put in their guidance boils down to it that certain elements of how you should manage and organize yourselves are a prerequisite, no matter the size of the organization. So there should be a certain level of governance where roles, tasks, and responsibilities are being assigned into the organization. A compliance function is actually expected in these programs, and it already can start with companies as of the size of 20-25 people. But also, let's say, focusing on strategy, let's say the vision on what is your position, let's say, within these ESG requirements. How are you going to deal with that? What is your responsibility in the chain? You are expected to make decisions on that. And based on those decisions, be aware of risk and adverse impacts that may relate to your activities. And based on those, take decisions on what to do. And based on the obligations that you have, take measures, processes, procedures. And I put there 2 bars on the upper side and the lower side, because data is becoming more and more important as, let's say, the basis for companies to understand, okay, what actually are our clients doing? What are the characteristics of transactions? So most of the activities to manage or organize or to have processes and procedures can be automated and are already expected to be automated. But this may also support efficiency in the compliance operations. And at the lower side, there are a lot of regulations, but companies are expected to be aware of those and to take action. And the question is, how can you keep track of all these developments in laws and regulations, geopolitical developments? That's really a challenge. But the compliance approach that you take, your business organization, roles and responsibilities should lead to it that you have a pretty good idea of what is applicable to you. And with that, I hand the word over to Geert.
Thank you, Herman. Thank you, Jasper, for those insights. What I want to do now is to focus on 4 technologies that are influencing compliance in international trade and transport. Or to be more precise, focus on how artificial intelligence and the really rapid advancement of artificial intelligence is acting as a catalyst that exponentially enhances the usefulness of the other technologies, which have been around for a bit longer, but we do see a quick take-up now through to the artificial intelligence. One of the trends is that we now see an abundance of business data that becomes available at your fingertips. IoT devices have been there for a long time, but also now with the AI, it becomes possible to have at a much more granular level information and capability to process information quickly that is being generated there. And finally, we talk about distributed ledger technologies and how that, what the challenges and promises are there. I can talk about AI. As I mentioned, we see this as a catalyst for change in trade and transport. And this is something as much to say for an AI skeptic as I am. I don't believe in general AI. I don't believe that machines can think and feel and that they will take over the world. But what we do see is that the rapid advancement of one kind of AI, which is only recently being developed, is unbelievable. I myself have been in the world of old-fashioned AI, expert systems, or symbolic AI, if we want to use the modern term, since the early 90s. And when I entered the field of AI, it typically was in the middle of what's now called the AI winter. A lot of people, after initial successes in the 50s, 60s, 70s, were disappointed with AI, and until halfway through the 2010s, AI remained something for geeks and universities. In fact, our product, our BFON platform, which underlies our capabilities, which we use in international trade and transport, we created that back in 2004, and it is an implementation of what we would now call symbolic AI. But we carefully stayed away of mentioning AI as a word because that would immediately place the technology in the not for serious business category. But now, since just in fact only 2 years, with the emergence of ChatGPT and the public availability of large language models, AI has reached an inflection point. The availability of LLMs and other AI tools has skyrocketed, and businesses across industries are racing to develop use cases and committing a vast number of resources. And this has resulted in many capabilities that we couldn't believe that were possible a few years back. A recent report by the World Trade Organization shows that the investments in training AIs has doubled every 3.5 months in 2012. That means still these investments are being made into the market, and companies are investing on top of those investments in developing use cases. That will mean that we're still in an early stage of what we can expect from AI, and fast development will continue. According to the same report, approximately 50% of the tasks performed by humans can be performed significantly faster by AI. And for me also, that is, let's demystify AI. It is not a thinking machine. It's not something that will take over the world, according to me. But it does actually that brings an enormous productivity improvement in human tasks that until now could not be automated that much. And that's one of those tasks is compliance in the trade and transport sectors. Due to the enormous productivity increase, we can start solving some of the challenges that we did not think was possible a long time ago. But this brings opportunities and challenges. I first want to look at the key challenges in trade compliance, and then go on each of these individual trends. As Jasper already mentioned, the sheer volume of regulations that apply to even simple business activities is too big for an individual of a team to fully comprehend. And it is important that you know your regulations. The regulator does expect that you know your regulations. But if some examples, ING Bank, they estimate that they are confronted with a relevant regulatory update every 12 minutes. The OECD estimates that the complexity and the fact that every country has its own implementation of regulations, and they're all slightly different or completely different, this increases trade costs by as much as 20% or 75% in terms of tariff equivalents. This is creating a substantial barrier to market access, certainly for smaller and medium-sized enterprises. And the pace of introduction of new regulations, as Herman showed, is not slowing down. Certainly the EU is planning to introduce a lot of new regulations impacting supply chains and requiring people to understand their supply chain and make sure that these supply chains comply with regulations. And what we also see is that the nature of regulations is changing from risk-based due diligence to clear prohibitions. You have to make sure that you don't break the law. Next to understanding the regulations, you also need to be able to classify your cargo in terms of that regulation, because that will determine what requirements apply. And not only in terms of HS codes, which is relatively simple, but also be able to understand, classify your cargo in terms of export control classification, hazard materials, of waste. For example, when is a used electric car or a used iPhone, when is that by the EU classified as waste? I'm not sure, but I've been told it has to do with the quality of the use of the battery. So being able to classify goods is really difficult. And certainly in situations where bad actors, they can benefit from misclassification or undervaluation of your cargo. Third element is that, and Herman mentioned that also already, regulators are more and more treating logistics service providers as gatekeepers to international supply chains. And they expect that logistics service providers know their supply chain, and they know not only who they're dealing with, but also who's behind that, who's the owner of the company that you're dealing with, in fact, who's the ultimate beneficiary owner. Finding ultimate beneficiary owners can take days and sometimes even weeks, certainly in situations where an ultimate beneficiary owner doesn't want to be found, has reasons not to be want to be found. But next to the ownership, which is important for sanction, we do see that new regulations require organizations to understand the supply chain upstream. Who's your supplier's supplier and who's his supplier? In order to be able to comply with ESG type regulations like deforestation and forced labor, but also downstream. Who are your customers, and what are they going to use the products that you're shipping are going to use them for? This in terms of export control and sanction regulations. And finally, operational awareness, which used to be good enough if you do the documentary check of a transaction and then you were fine. Nowadays, regulators do expect that you detect anomalies in operations, that you raise red flags as soon as something happens to a cargo which was unexpected, when it's being tampered with or being rerouted and it deviates from the compliance approved itineraries. If you then look at some of the AI technologies, how they can support this. One of the first things, and I think a big development where we see AI make a huge impact in the coming years, and that's already starting now, is in understanding regulations and automating compliance. The WTO report that I mentioned, they estimate that AI, in combination with the other technologies we mentioned, will be able to reduce the cost of compliance by as much as 70%. One element, and we see that quite a lot, is in goods classification. So many AI-powered classification tools for HS classifications, some of them which allow you to upload a picture of goods, and then you get a prediction of the associated HS codes. We ourselves have developed tools, AI-enabled, that take descriptions in any language and then predict the correct HS code, or take a combination of provided HS codes and goods descriptions or pictures, and then check if that's plausible or not, or there's a reason to expect some anomaly behind it. Next step, which we see, is that not only to HS classification, but also export control regulation. That's somewhat more difficult, as the performance characteristics of products that are not readily known by even manufacturers, and certainly not logistics service providers, are used to describe if a certain product is regulated or classified as dual use or not. We are currently working in a government-funded lab, an AI lab, to develop good classifiers that can decomposition products in their components, use the component product data sheets to map that to regulatory text. Something that would not be possible at scale without the AI components that we currently, or AI technologies that's currently being developed. And next is an exciting development, one that we have been informed, we believe that we are at the forefront of, is using AI as some kind of regulatory assistant. A piece of technology that can automatically identify all relevant transaction, specific requirements for specific shipment, and pre-transaction tell you these are the documentary requirements that you need to meet, and in process can tell you whether the current situation is still in compliance with the regulations that are there, that can react to any change in the supply chain. AI is much better than humans in sifting through vast volumes of regulations. However, we feel that a new form of hybrid AI needs to be developed to deal with it, because compliance and legal reasoning needs a somewhat more strict and deterministic form of AI than the current statistical approaches. What is needed is to be precise, to have a decision that's traceable and explainable to the regulator, that based on these, our interpretation of the rules, this is how we, and this is information that we had available, this is why we made this decision. Predictability becomes important. So this is we have been supporting with the Dutch government, TNO and leading universities, pioneering a new kind of AI, a hybrid AI that combines statistical models with symbolic AI to solve this. This was a really exciting and new development that the Dutch government has awarded a consortium led by Be Informed, the Dutch State Foundation for Research, DNO, and Cargo Ledger in combination with universities and the logistics industry, a 5-year lab to develop these type of technologies, to develop the AI components, to interpret regulations and be able to reason over regulations, to automate compliance. A lot of the core technology concepts have been around for many years. Inform started with implementing these, and they have proven to work, but economically they were not feasible because it was just too expensive to interpret all the regulations. Now, with the potential of the enormous improvement of AI, it becomes possible to develop these trade compliance assistants, and you'll be seeing quite a lot of them, I think, over the next few years. Next. The second thing where AI is really helping to significantly reduce the cost of compliance, next to the regulatory interpretation and finding the documents and compiling the documents you need to do, is in getting the data there and help you support in partner and transaction due diligence. Global business data, which has been available in all kinds of public registries, from ownership registries, IP registries, but also court cases, currently being brought together with the help of AI, and companies like Sayari, whose technology we've integrated in our ITTS platform, are able to link vast amounts of these individual unstructured business data sources together in comprehensive large knowledge graph. Combining that with commercial data allows you now to have full transparency in ownership structures, and also who is supply chain actors that are working with you, and mapping that to risk factors. This reduces the time for compliance teams to assess their business partners from hours and days to perhaps minutes and seconds. But on the other hand, be aware, regulators are also adopting these technologies. An example is the US Customs and Border Patrol. They're using Sayari data now to predict that the shipment coming into the US has been or has a risk of being used by having forced labor in the supply chain. And that, as soon as they suspect that, they place the burden of proof on the importer. Another example, which I just recently learned, is in the EU, where they are using AI for anomaly detection. And they took, for instance, data from pet import and used that to uncover fraud with pet passports by combining pet passport information over the last 10 years with notifications of member states if something went wrong, and vaccine information. And they used AI to really sift through that and identify bad actors. The shocking part, the cost of doing that was just €3 to calculate the difference. A recent study by the WTO revealed that 25% of border agencies already use these technologies, and 25% is starting to use it now. So you will see that AI will help you reduce costs, but also it will raise the stakes for everybody involved. Next slide. Conscious of time, I'll speed up a bit. What you also see is that IoT and operational awareness are becoming much more useful now. The availability of low-cost IoT-enabled tags that you can put on ships initially, but due to the lower cost on containers, perhaps even on products when they're valuable, allows you to know where they are at any point in during the day, and also what their status is, not only temperature, but also if the security seals are being opened or not. And that, combined with AI that can process the huge amount of data that generates there, allows organizations to know as soon as something changes and there's a deviation from the pre-approved compliance route, and actions can be taken there. Next slide. And finally, a lot of investment we see, and a lot of also very positive pilots, is in infrastructure of trust, where people are using distributed ledgers or digital product passports, and they really do offer a potential for transformation in the supply chain, where it becomes possible that identified and trusted partners that work together, they can rely on compliance assessments by upstream actors, and downstream actors can trust the data that is shared with them, not only the data, but also the compliance assessment. That will make it possible to reduce the cost of everybody in supply chain having to redo the compliance assessment. Unfortunately, we do see that there are many interesting pilots, and they're all very much limited to a single supply trade lane or a single country or single product group. Getting to global adoption still requires a lot of technical and also regulatory and standards barriers that need to develop. So although the big promise there, take-up will probably take longer because it does require that people collaborate, and that's just what we're not good at. And in the meantime, the other technologies will be there to safeguard compliance in the supply chain. A bit of conclusion, AI will enhance every aspect of productivity in international trade. As I said, WTO, the WTO, they estimate up to 56% of all tasks can be completed faster with AI. It will reduce trade costs by overcoming language barriers, minimizing search costs, by improving operations, by improving planning, but certainly also by reducing compliance costs, which could be up to 70%. But on the other hand, the costs become lower, but the requirements will become higher because customs agency will use the same technology to look at all shipments that you're doing. So from doing the risk-based part to checking every transaction that comes in, there's well, they will up the stakes again in this situation. That's where I want to leave it. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for such an insightful presentations. A quick note for our audience, we're going to have a panel discussion, and after that we will have a Q&A session. So if you have any questions, please just hand it in right now at the Q&A chat box. So to start the discussions, I would like to ask all of our speakers here, what strategies can businesses adopt to navigate compliance challenges while maintaining operational efficiency?
Well, let me answer that question. The first part of the question is about the strategy. I think the best strategy is to stay up to date and to stay knowledgeable on the rules and regulations that apply, but especially those that are relevant to you as a business. Staying up to date can be hard. If you're large enough, you have your own compliance staff, it might be a little bit easier. If you're smaller and you're not so knowledgeable on this material, you need perhaps partners like RSM to inform you. But there are plenty of network organizations out there that share knowledge, like HIDC, that have a lot of webinars about these topics, during which you can network with other companies and share best practices. And how to remain efficient is the other part of the question. Geert provided, I think, the answer to that question. It's applying technology in the right way to make sure that a lot of work is done more efficiently by systems than you can do manually. And I think we should step away from the declaration model that we have now, because that's the administrative burden that we see, towards a connected model where we share data to the relevant regulators or stakeholders, so that they can use the data to check whether you're compliant or not, further reducing your administrative burden. So I think that would be my main answer to this question.
You have anything to add, Herman or Geert? Herman, sorry, you're on mute.
Excuse me. Thank you, Jasper. I think you make a very fair point. It's my experience that it first starts with awareness with entities that these compliance requirements do exist. And yeah, if I look from the angle of, let's say, the court cases I showed, but also the enforcement that sometimes takes place, is that companies were not aware of the issues in the first place or shied away. I've also seen instances that if entities take reasonable measures, at least took steps in order to become aware and do take efforts to comply, that the intention is good, also from an regulator point of view and supervision point of view, that is being seen and appreciated, let's say, in dealing with possible violations. Having said that, also regulators think about it, how regulations can be feasible. And I think what we see in the guidances with respect to these compliance issues, as I tried to picture in, let's say, the compliance program requirements, the elements that you are supposed to have, they are actually to both smaller companies as well as bigger companies. But it should be proportionate, and you should take into account complexity of issues, but also, let's say, the size of your activities and also the risks that are related to that. If you're a smaller company, less complex transactions and lower risks, that also means that you can do with less. Yeah. But also, let's face it, ESG, it's a complex regulatory environment with unclarities, uncertainties, which will become applicable, and logistics service providers, as let's say which will have a portal function, must be aware that these obligations arise.
Thank you very much, Herman. Yeah. And how can businesses anticipate and adapt to the ongoing geopolitical changes?
Yeah, I think these things do not happen overnight. And I think that the developments that we discussed in the presentation, they are out there. I think there is a lot of attention with respect to Trump becoming the new president. Also, let's say, how China may act. Also, let's say, for example, with automotive industry or with other aspects. I think what is relevant is to understand what's going on, but particularly translate this to possible implications directly to the daily business operations of logistics service providers, transporting of goods, the architecturing and structuring of international activities, the logistics. What implications does that have? Also financially, which is key to anticipate. But also, let's say, the indirect impacts of these regulations that are coming at us. Awareness, being aware that this is happening, and also the associations that are trying to keep their members informed about these regulations and developments. There's a lot of information out there, a lot of cooperation out there. Also within the trusted communities where logistics service providers operate, cooperate with each other. I think that's important.
Yeah. Do you have something to add, Geert, on the evolving of regulations? How can logistics provider prepare for this?
I think, and that's what Herman is saying, and I think that's where it starts, is perhaps start treating also regulatory requirements as a first-class citizen in designing your business and your strategies, where we all sure that we focus on data. We want to make sure that we understand the data, that's what's happening operationally. It is also important that there is a function that knows what are the regulatory changes coming up, and that the implementation is not led to only trusting that compliance teams across the world will all by magic know what is going to happen. We probably also need to do regulatory requirements as a first-class citizen in our designs and into implementing our processes.
Yeah, thank you. So to wrap up this discussions, my last question is, what would be the key compliance trends for 2025 that you think logistics service provider need to prepare for?
I think that the key one, which is really difficult, and I'll keep this short, is insights in supply chains, upstream and also downstream. You see that from export control, sanction regulations. People are getting more strict. They're requiring logistics service providers to understand what is exactly happening, not only with the direct customer, but also ownership, but also the customer's customer. And now with new ESG type regulations, also know your supply chain upstream and be able to predict. And this supply chain insight, I think is really difficult for organizations to adapt and new. So that's, for me, that would be the biggest one.
Jasper, Herman, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that the geopolitical situation will continue and may even get more worse, unfortunately. And I think the instruments that the regulators and the authorities have at hands are the ones we discussed: export control, sanctions, security regulations. And yeah, I have the feeling that those might become stricter even next year. Next to that, the question will be the ambition with respect to ESG that has been initiated since the introduction of the Green Deal and all the regulatory initiatives that have been taken. Yeah, will that still evolve as planned? I think there is a reality now that both authorities and private entities may not be able to meet all these goals. Question is, what will happen? So this might result in more legal uncertainty, but also, let's say, on the ambitions. Yeah, so I think keeping track of developments in that respect is even becoming more important to see what the geopolitical developments, but also, let's say, on the ESG level, will bring to the table.
Right.
Yeah, from a business perspective, the geopolitical challenges will increase, but also the trade compliance. And in terms of logistics service providers, your customers need you because they are also struggling on international trade compliance, on these geopolitical compliance matters, and they need the logistics service provider as a partner to remain compliant. So when in doubt, my advice would be talk to the regulators. In the Netherlands, it's quite easy to talk to the tax authority or to customs, to talk to consultants, to get a clear picture of your responsibilities and where you stand in terms of compliance. But it also helps you advise your existing customers. But in most cases, when I talk to foreign shippers that want to set up on the European market, there's lots of questions on trade compliance, on VAT, on customs, product regulations. And it really helps if you can help them, because when you solve that compliance puzzle, your step onto the market gets closer. And it gets the logistics service provider closer to the business as well. So I think that trend, as the landscape becomes more complex, the importance of logistics service providers to be able to consult your customers on what you are exposed to when you enter the European market, I think that will become increasingly important when you want to survive.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So to wrap up our discussions, I know that we have covered a lot today, but we will send everybody a follow-up email to summarize all of the key points that the panel have suggested, and also the advice for you to prepare for 2025. So you can expect it an email after this webinar. And moving on to the Q&A, we have questions coming from Emil. So Emil is asking, what role do emerging technology plays in simplifying compliance, and how can businesses ensure they choose the right tools?
I think here that's in your lane.
Yeah, that's in my lane. Well, can play. That's an elaborate question. The technology, I think I sketched how AI can help increase productivity. Still means that as an organization, you need to get your processes in order, you get the data available, but then the technologies that are there, they can increase automation a lot. And with increased automation, it can become possible to integrate much more in the primary process and to reduce human effort needed. I think that's where most of the wins will be. Automation, that's what we need. And new technology will enable us to automate somewhat of these somewhat complexer questions that we used not to be able to do. We can pick that up in the future.
Thank you very much. I do not see any new questions coming, so I think we can wrap up the webinar now as we're also running out of time. So again, thank you all very much for joining us today. Thank you. Big thank you to our speakers here, Herman and Jasper, for your time, and we will see you all in the next sessions.